The house on Willow Street had always been quiet. Nestled at the end of a long, tree-lined road in the small town of Ashford, it had been a place of refuge for Anna Wright and her father. That quiet, however, was shattered on a cold autumn evening, October 3rd, 2022, when Anna received the news that would change her life forever. It was 7:15 in the evening when the phone rang, jolting Anna from her thoughts. She had been staring at the kitchen wall, lost in the routine of chopping vegetables for dinner. The sound was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Anna almost didn't answer, but something, perhaps the unshakable feeling of dread that had been gnawing at her for weeks, pushed her to pick up the receiver. On the other end was Officer Miller, his voice grave and deliberate as he relayed the message. There had been an accident on Highway 18, and her father, Thomas Wright, along with his new wife, Laura, were dead. Anna's world tilted. The vegetables lay forgotten on the countertop as she sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Thomas Wright, her steady, dependable father, was gone. Laura, her father's second wife, whom Anna had never fully trusted, was gone too. As the words of the officer echoed in her ears, Anna felt a cold wave of isolation wash over her. At that moment, she wasn't thinking about what came next, about the funeral, the condolences, or the legalities. All she could think about was the house on Willow Street and the fact that it was now hers. But not hers alone. Mark Preston, Laura's son from her previous marriage, would be moving in too. Anna had never been close to Mark. He was 5 years older, brooding and distant, a stark contrast to her more open and trusting nature. When their parents had married 3 years earlier, the blending of their families had been more of a forced formality than a genuine union. Mark and Anna had lived their lives parallel to each other, intersecting only at the dinner table and in polite conversation. 3 days after the accident, on October 6th, 2022, Anna found herself standing in the foyer of the house, watching as Mark carried his last bag through the door. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, giving the room an eerie, unfamiliar feel. There was a stiffness to Mark's movements, a silent anger that seemed to pulse just beneath his calm exterior. They exchanged few words as he settled in, both knowing that the house held ghosts they were not ready to confront. As the days passed, the tension between them grew. Mark spent most of his time in the basement, a space he had claimed as his own, leaving Anna to wander through the empty rooms upstairs. She often found herself in her father's study, drawn to the lingering scent of his cologne and the faint impression of his presence. It was there, on the evening of October 9th, 2022, at 8:45 in the evening, that Anna first noticed something strange. Her father's desk, always meticulously organized, had a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, she found a small, leather-bound notebook that she had never seen before. As she opened it, her breath caught. The pages were filled with her father's handwriting, each entry dated and detailed. The last entry was made on September 29th, 2022, just 4 days before the accident. It was brief, cryptic, and chilling. "I fear there is more at play than I first believed. Must be careful. Laura is hiding something. Mark knows." The weight of the words settled on Anna's chest like a stone. She closed the notebook and stood there in the dim light, the room spinning around her. What had her father discovered, and why had he kept it from her? As Anna's mind raced with questions, she realized that she was no longer just grieving. She was now searching for answers. The silence of the house was no longer comforting. It was oppressive. And as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, Anna knew that she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, and whatever it was only just beginning to reveal itself. Anna had always felt safe in her father's study, but that sense of security was beginning to erode. The notebook she discovered on October 9th, 2022, weighed heavily on her mind, and as she sat at her father's desk at 10 o'clock that night, the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The faint creaks of the old wood and the occasional sigh of the wind outside only added to the growing sense of unease that had settled over her. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just her grief clouding her judgment. Mark had been spending more and more time in the basement, avoiding Anna as much as possible. On October 11th, 2022, around 7:45 in the evening, Anna heard a noise coming from the basement, something heavy being dragged across the floor. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest, before deciding to investigate. The basement was dimly lit, the single bulb casting long shadows across the unfinished walls. She found Mark crouched over an old trunk, its lid open and its contents scattered on the floor. When Mark noticed her, he stood abruptly, his expression unreadable. He asked what she was doing there, his voice flat, almost accusatory. Anna faltered, taken aback by the hostility in his tone. She mentioned she had heard something and wanted to check if everything was okay. Mark's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was palpable. Finally, Mark broke the silence, explaining that the trunk belonged to his mother and that he was just going through her things. He dismissed it as no big deal, but it was a big deal. Anna could sense it in the way Mark's hand lingered over the items in the trunk, his fingers brushing against a faded photograph of his mother. She recognized the photo. Laura had kept it on the mantelpiece for years. In it, she looked much younger, smiling brightly beside a man who wasn't Thomas Wright. As Anna's gaze shifted to the other items, she noticed a bundle of letters tied with a frayed ribbon. The ink faded and the paper yellowed with age. Something about those letters tugged at Anna's curiosity, but before she could ask about them, Mark slammed the trunk shut, the loud bang making her jump. Mark asserted that there was nothing there that concerned her, his tone final. Without another word, he picked up the trunk and carried it to a dark corner of the basement, where he shoved it behind an old bookshelf. Anna didn't argue. She knew better than to push Mark when he was in one of his moods. Instead, she turned and went back upstairs, but the uneasy feeling in her gut only grew stronger. The image of the letters stayed with her, and as she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Something was wrong. More than just grief. More than just the strain of two people forced to live together out of necessity rather than choice. The next morning, on October 12th, 2022, Anna woke up determined to learn more about what her father had written in that notebook. She spent hours combing through his study, looking for any additional clues that might explain the cryptic entry from September 29th, 2022. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she had nearly given up when she noticed a loose floorboard near the window. Her heart raced as she pried it open, revealing a small, dust-covered box hidden underneath. Inside the box were documents, including a death certificate that didn't belong to either of her parents. The name on the certificate, John Harris, meant nothing to her, but the date of death did, June 4th, 2005. Anna remembered that summer vividly. It was the year her mother had died, and her father had become withdrawn and secretive, a shadow of the man he once was. Anna's fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents. There was a newspaper clipping about a fatal car accident, a police report, and a handwritten note that read, "John knew too much. I had no choice. Keep this hidden, Laura." The room seemed to tilt as Anna processed what she was seeing. Her stepmother had been involved in something far darker than Anna had ever imagined. And her father, had he known? Had he been trying to protect Anna from a truth too horrible to face? As the day wore on, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was somehow connected to all of this. His secretive behavior, his intense protectiveness over his mother's belongings. There was more to the story, and Anna was determined to uncover it. That evening, as the clock struck 8:30 in the evening, Anna confronted Mark again, this time in the kitchen. The tension between them had reached a breaking point, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. Mark's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall as if he were waiting for something. Someone. Anna demanded to know who John Harris was, the question hanging in the air, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of fear in Mark's eyes. But then his expression hardened and he shook his head. Mark warned Anna to stay out of it, his voice low and dangerous. She knew she was already in too deep. The secrets that had been buried for so long were beginning to surface, and she was determined to find the truth, no matter the cost. As Mark turned away, Anna realized she would have to dig deeper into the past, into her family's darkest secrets, if she wanted to survive what was coming next. The nightmare was far from over. Anna had always known there was something dark beneath the surface of her family's history, but nothing could have prepared her for what she discovered on the night of October 15th, 2022. It was 11:15 in the evening, and the house on Willow Street was deathly silent. Anna had been unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of the hidden documents she'd found just days earlier. The note with Laura's handwriting haunted her. John knew too much. I had no choice. Keep this hidden. A sinister message that gnawed at her relentlessly. The storm outside rattled the windows, as if urging her to confront the storm brewing within the walls of her own home. Mark had been acting more erratically with each passing day. His movements were jittery, his eyes darting nervously whenever Anna was near. Earlier that evening, at 7:30 in the evening, she'd watched him leave the house in a hurry, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't returned, and Anna was beginning to wonder if he ever would. It was in that tense, uncertain moment that Anna made up her mind. She needed to find out the truth. The truth about her father, about Laura, about Mark, and the connection to the mysterious John Harris. Taking a deep breath, Anna made her way down to the basement, where Mark had been spending so much of his time. The old wooden stairs creaked under her weight, the sound echoing ominously in the darkness. The basement was musty and cold, the dim light from the single bulb barely piercing the thick shadows. The trunk Mark had been so protective of was still there, tucked behind the old bookshelf in the corner. With trembling hands, Anna pulled it out and opened the lid. The letters were still inside, along with several other items she hadn't noticed before. A set of old keys, a worn-out map, and a small tape recorder. Heart-pounding, she picked up the recorder and pressed play. A voice crackled through the static, distorted but unmistakable. It was her father's voice, recorded on September 28, 2022, just days before the crash that had taken his life. John Harris didn't die by accident, the voice said, shaky and filled with fear. I found out too late. Laura, she was behind it all. She made sure he wouldn't talk. Mark helped her. He didn't know what he was doing, but he helped. Now she's planning something else, and I have to stop her. If anything happens to me. The tape cut off abruptly, leaving Anna in stunned silence. The implications were horrifying. Laura had killed before, and she had used Mark to do it. But what was her father so afraid of? What was Laura planning next? Anna's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. The letters, the death certificate, the map, they all pointed to something bigger, something that had been hidden for years. But why had her father kept it a secret? And why had he left those clues for Anna to find? Just as she was about to search through the letters again, Anna heard a noise upstairs. It was a faint creak, the sound of a door opening, followed by soft footsteps on the floor above. Panic surged through her as she realized Mark had returned. She quickly hid the trunk back behind the bookshelf, her heart racing as she tried to steady her breathing. The basement door creaked open, and Anna felt her blood run cold. It was 11:45 in the evening when Mark descended the stairs, his face pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He didn't notice Anna at first. His focus was on the trunk she had just hastily concealed. As he moved toward it, Anna stepped out from behind the shelf, her sudden appearance startling him. He froze, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Anna could see the realization dawning in his eyes. She knew. She knew everything. The letters, the tape, the death certificate, it all pointed to him. Or at least, that's what Mark seemed to believe. His expression twisted into something ugly, a mix of fear and anger as he stepped forward, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. Anna felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. Not now, not after everything she had learned. But before she could react, Mark lunged at her, his hand gripping a small, sharp object. A knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. The force of his attack sent them both crashing to the floor, the knife slashing wildly as they struggled. Anna's survival instinct kicked in as she fought back with everything she had. The struggle was intense, both of them grappling for control of the weapon, their movements frantic and desperate. The old basement filled with the sound of their heavy breathing, the knife clattering against the concrete floor as it slipped from Mark's grasp. In a final, desperate move, Anna managed to kick Mark off her, sending him stumbling backward into the shelves. The impact knocked the trunk over, spilling its contents across the floor. The letters, the keys, the map, they scattered everywhere, the evidence of their dark family history laid bare for both of them to see. Mark froze, his eyes wide with realization. It was as if seeing everything out in the open had finally shattered whatever delusions he had been clinging to. But it was too late. Anna scrambled to her feet, grabbing the knife and pointing it at him, her hands shaking but determined. As Mark raised his hands in surrender, the clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Anna knew this wasn't over. Mark was subdued for now, but the real danger still lingered, the truth still hidden in the shadows of their past. The fight was over, but the nightmare had just begun. Anna had uncovered too much, and she knew that what she had found was only the beginning. She would need to dig even deeper, confront the real monsters in her family's history, and face the final terrifying truth. The storm had finally subsided by 1:30 in the morning on October 16th, 2022, leaving the house on Willow Street in an unsettling quiet. Anna stood in the basement, her breath heavy, the knife still clutched in her trembling hand. Mark was slumped against the wall, his eyes closed, blood seeping from a shallow cut on his arm. The fight had drained them both, but it was over. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the small basement window, Anna slowly sank to the floor, her body aching from the struggle. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, a truth that had nearly cost her life. The scattered letters and documents around her painted a clear picture of the darkness that had tainted her family for years. Her stepmother Laura had been at the center of it all, pulling the strings, manipulating Mark, and leaving a trail of death and deception in her wake. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Anna finally called the police, her voice steady as she reported the incident. The evidence she had uncovered, the letters, the recordings, the death certificate, was enough to open a new investigation into her father's death, as well as the mysterious death of John Harris all those years ago. The authorities arrived by 7:30 in the morning, the blue and red lights of their cars casting eerie shadows against the house. Mark was taken into custody, his eyes hollow, the fight completely drained from him. As they led him away, Anna watched in silence, knowing that the battle was far from over. But for now she was safe. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Anna knew she would have to face the final truths hidden within her family's past.